Thank you so much for joining us for the lunch installment for our week in residency. I'm just curious because this is the fifth in a series of 5 events, and even though you weren't required to attend any of the first 4 or all of the first 4, I am curious who has made it to each one of the 5 events throughout this week. Really, I'm going to give you a round of applause because I really appreciate that, because as we've talked about, we embarked upon this journey, these week in residencies, because it's something that we heard from you, our patrons, the ask to provide an opportunity for a deeper, more sustained learning opportunity. But 2, I would share a round of applause for those that made even just this very one or 1 or 2, because it really is something remarkable, I think, that you've chosen to spend a portion of your day today, or portions of your days otherwise, because I don't know about you, but while it's been a little humid and a little hot, it's been absolutely stunningly gorgeous in Erie, Pennsylvania this week, but you chose to spend and invest your time here with us in this learning opportunity, and for that we are incredibly grateful. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet, I'm Ben Spagan, I'm the Vice President of the JES. I'm here really to do a couple of functional things, and I want to turn it over to someone that many of you, seeing the volume of hands raised, know quite well at this point. Dr. Robert Garland, who we are so honored to have with us. Functionally, the first thing I'm to tell you, otherwise I'm going to forget it, we are out of water in our water cooler there. We have sat some water bottles out. If those in fact run out and you need water, let us know. Our team is happy to provide some for you. Likewise, if you're experiencing any other challenges or difficulties, or just need assistance during the event, please come and find one of our helpful team members to make sure that we can help you with whatever is troubling you, so that you absolutely enjoy this experience here with us. So as we know, we are in our summer schedule worth of programs. We kicked this off in a very big way here with this residency. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that seeing the success of last year's summer residencies, and of course the call to bring back Dr. Robert Garland, we have done that, but we've also built upon that. We have Dr. Jay Cost, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and the author of a number of books on the founders, coming in August. The week of August 11th, we're going to look at the founder's perspective. It's a chance to look at the founding period of the United States of America through the lens of some half dozen of the founders, what they were going through, what they were thinking. It's always a joy when we say we have the opportunity to bring somebody who literally wrote the book on that, and he has several of them, of our founders. So we hope to see you back for that sustained learning opportunity as well. In between, though, we have plenty of other events coming up. I think we had some 40-plus events scheduled for our summer term. Next week, in fact, we get right to it on Monday. Brian Graff will be talking about the Union timberclads on the Mississippi River in 1861 during the Civil War. Brian is a remarkably accomplished cartographer, but also historian. He's given this lecture in other parts of our community. We're very much looking forward to that. 6 p.m. at the Lincoln Community Center. That's part of our satellite programming initiative, taking the programming to the communities that wish to have it, expanding beyond our own campus. So we'll see you for that event. It is free, but we ask for advanced registration, just so that we know how many chairs to have in the room, and I'm sure that's going to be a popular one. Speaking about our satellite programming, we do go down to Corey, Pennsylvania as well, and with our partnership at the Corey High Ed, for which we are grateful. Tuesday at 6 p.m., Dr. Jeff Bloodworth, professor at Gannon University, and the steward of the series that we've launched here in our publications division, Men in Crisis, Class Disparity in Politics, looking at something new that's troubling us now. He's going to be talking about that series and why we should pay attention to that. Tuesday at 6 at the Corey High Ed, and next Wednesday. During the summer, we traditionally are not operational on Fridays, so we've moved our community conversation series to Wednesdays mostly, and that's at noon on Wednesday. So As you're enjoying your lunch here, that will be a lunchtime program. We are looking forward to learning from Adam Bratton, who is going to talk about the intersection between government and nonprofits. And Adam is the head of the nonprofit partnership here in Erie County. A friendly reminder that following this presentation, we're going to save time for questions from you, the audience. Again, my favorite questions are just that, the questions. Little hook with a period underneath it, not long, lengthy statements. We'll try to get through as many as we can, especially because today is so gorgeous and we want you to be able to go enjoy it. But we'll have Q&A with our audience. If you have a question, just raise your hand. One of our team members will come around and bring the microphone to you. Again, it has been an absolute honor to welcome back to Erie, Pennsylvania, Dr. Robert Garland, the famed historian and author and professor emeritus at Colgate University, somebody that we've gotten a chance to hang out with and get to know and really feel as if he's one of our own here at the JES, and to take a look at days in history. What a day makes, what a difference a day makes, and ask questions, what if? And we've seen four before of these inflection points that have chartered the course of humanity. Here we get a chance to take a look at one of our important days of the bombing of Hiroshima, what that means when we've achieved nuclear war. And so, again, it's my absolute honor to have one of the best and brightest, one who really makes history come alive, makes it human with the power and gift for storytelling. Please join me in issuing, I'm sure not the last, but the last this week, warm welcome from the JES in Erie, Pennsylvania to Dr. Robert Garland.
Well, I endorse absolutely everything that Ben just said. It's been delightful to hang out with you as well. And as I said this yesterday, you've been a wonderful audience. I've really relished the questions, even the hard questions. And there may well be questions that you have today, I should say, which I will not be able to answer. I'm not a nuclear physicist. I know nothing about the splitting of the atom. I cannot really distinguish plutonium from uranium and other such issues, so I crave your forgiveness on my ignorance on those matters. One can approach this subject from so many different angles, of course, and as I mentioned, I think it was on Monday, for me this is a very personal subject, because, as I said, I wouldn't be standing here if the bomb had not been dropped, because my father, who was a Japanese prisoner of war in Japan at that time, would certainly have been killed. He was just a few miles from Nagasaki when the bomb on Nagasaki was dropped, and he had been in Nagasaki until just a few weeks, but had been moved to a camp at a place called Omine. So I have obviously an invested interest in this lecture. And when I was choosing the series, the inflection points, as Ben mentioned, even though this one is one that goes in so many directions, and I'm sure so many of you have your own, perhaps, experiences, memories, ideas, and so forth, I felt that I had to include it in a series which was, after all, dealing with turning points in history. And this absolutely, undeniably, was one of the greatest turning points in history, modern or ancient. So we begin in 1939 with this famous letter which Einstein and Leo Szilard, who was a Hungarian physicist, wrote to President Roosevelt, and it expresses the anxiety of those two physicists about the possibilities that were now available in creating a bomb, and one that could be created, as he thought, in the near future. And Einstein, at that point, certainly believed that the Germans were also in the race to produce an atomic bomb, which, of course, they weren't. So, or if they were nowhere near the point of producing one. J. Robert Oppenheimer has been in the news, as it were, fairly recently with the film Oppenheimer. He was put in charge of the Manhattan Project in 1942. So it took 3 years for the bomb actually to be produced. And it was, of course, highly secret and so forth. And work proceeded apace, one might say, with scientists not only from the US, but also from the UK and from Canada. Back to my country, which at the outbreak of the war breaks out in 1939, is struggling. The British Expeditionary Force to France had no chance of staying on the continent with the fall of France and had to be evacuated, and 330,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated in the space of about 10 days by some 800 little ships, most of them, of course, just privately owned. It was humiliating, one might say, but it was also heroic as well. And had it not happened, well, Britain certainly would have faced an invasion within months, if not weeks. And very soon afterwards, a bombing campaign began in Britain, the Blitz, as we call it, and Winston Churchill there delivers this speech, which I'm going to deliver here. The whole might and fury of the enemy must soon be turned against us. If we can stand up to Hitler, the whole of Europe may be free, and the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. Let us, therefore, brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire lasts for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. I won't say more about Winston Churchill. Well, I will say one more thing about him. But obviously, his capacity to strengthen the will of the British people. We talked at an earlier lecture about the part played by great men in history. And is that something that played out in the Second World War? I think most certainly it did, in terms of Churchill's contribution to stiffening the spirit of the British people. So the Battle of Britain breaks out. That is to say, the Luftwaffe seek to completely destroy the Royal Air Force, and this takes place over a period of about 6 months. And it is a fight between the British Spitfire and the German Messerschmitts. And the picture on the right there of the pilots just resting on the ground before they get the alarm and they go into air always moves me very much, because there they are just chatting and trying to pretend that it's an ordinary afternoon, and 5 minutes later they'll be in the air, scrambling, as the word was, and facing a life and death struggle. The Blitz I mentioned, which takes place at the same time as the Battle of Britain. And we see the devastation there on the left around St. Paul's Cathedral. Many of the wonderful churches that Christopher Wren had built in the 17th century were destroyed, but miraculously, St. Paul's survived, even though bombs did lodge in the roof, which actually did not explode. So it was remarkable. And some 40,000 British civilians were killed in the course of the Blitz, and about 1 million homes were destroyed. It wasn't confined to London, though London bore the brunt of the Blitz. Other cities that were particularly badly hit were Plymouth, which was home to the British fleet, and Coventry, which was a very industrial city. And we see there on the right the ruins of Coventry Cathedral, which was rebuilt, but not with that dome that was destroyed there in the middle. That is left as a permanent reminder of the ravages that that cathedral underwent. So, in 2002, Churchill was voted the greatest Briton ever. In 2020, red paint was thrown on his statue, and the words, "Churchill was a racist," were inscribed on it. And again, I've talked on several occasions during these lectures about historical revisionism, about the way in which people have sought, rightly or wrongly, to redress and reinterpret events. And Churchill has not been spared this particular attack on his reputation. My father went off to the war on December the 12th, 1940, and I still have in my possession this letter which he wrote to my mother. I wasn't born yet, but they were married, and he sent this letter to her, which I'll take the liberty of reading to you. "I don't think I've told you how really grateful I am for all you fussing over me, the lovely meals, warm fires, and all the 1,001 ways you have always studied my comforts. And did I ever tell you how pretty you are and with what good taste you dress? There is not a man anywhere with a wife like I have got. You know, when this war is over, we have a frightful lot to look forward to. New home, new business, perhaps a kiddie, and everything fresh. Won't it be wonderful? So good night, my dear. Cuddle up, and don't go away, precious." And it reminds me not just of my father going off to war, but every soldier who has gone off to war and who has left his wife or his beloved or friends, family, and so forth, not knowing what the future will hold, but having to believe that the cause for which he was fighting would be worthwhile and that it would be a better world to which he returns. And then, about a year exactly after my father was doing training up in Scotland near Glasgow, Pearl Harbor was attacked, December the 7th, precisely 7:48 a.m. in the morning. And the Japanese admiral who had spearheaded the campaign gave the famous statement, although Wikipedia says it may actually only be alleged, "I fear that we have awoken a terrible giant, a sleeping giant, and filled him with a terrible rage." So he had immediate misgivings. Why did the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor? Because the US had imposed sanctions on Japan. Japan was at war with China, and it didn't want to draw the US into a war. It wanted to effectively neutralize the US. Well, it had, of course, the very opposite result, and it wasn't particularly effective anyway, because the 3 aircraft carriers were absent at the time, and although many ships were damaged because they were lying in shallow water, many could be repaired. Also, many of the sailors were on shore leave as well. So it was really a failed attempt, even though it was a completely, of course, unprovoked attack. The very next day, the Royal Marine ship, the Empress of Australia, set sail. And it was intending to go to North Africa to give support to Montgomery's men against the German General Rommel. But after Pearl Harbor, it was redirected to Java, to the Dutch East Indies, because Japan was seeking to gain control of that area. And it was a liner, an ocean-going liner, which had been converted into a carrying soldiers, 5,000 soldiers it could carry. And it went down Cape of Good Hope, across to Java, to Indonesia, and it landed at what was then called Batavia, but what was then afterwards called Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, and it landed on the 8th of February. And a month later, the Japanese had overrun the island, and resulting in the British and all other Allied forces having to surrender. So, as my father tells it, I said, "What were you doing when you learned that you were a prisoner of war?" And he said to me, "I was in the office interfering with no one." And I thought that was a wonderful reply. He was not a militaristic man, but nonetheless, he said, "We were very disgruntled. We never fired a shot. The Dutch surrendered on our behalf," because it was the Dutch East Indies, and the Dutch, therefore, were the controlling force. Like so many prisoners, like so many families waiting news of them, my mother never heard from my father until a year before the end of the war, and she received this card. I don't know whether you can read it there. It says, "I'm now in a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Java. Our camp is well equipped, and the accommodations are comfortable. Our daily life is very pleasant." Good to know. The Japanese treat us well, so don't worry about me and never feel uneasy. Health satisfactory, keep smiling, mother. All in my thoughts, no letter received yet from her. Keep writing, good chance, God bless, beloved. And that was the only communication that she heard from my father throughout the war. And at the end of the war, she was surprised to learn that he had survived, because the War Office had sent her a letter saying, Lance Corporal, you see there Lance Corporal, I'll mention this in a moment, Lance Corporal is missing, presumed dead, you need to apply for a pension, and so on and so forth. So like many, I imagine, it was quite a shock to her to learn that my father actually had survived. And he turned down a commission, but he wasn't actually even a Lance Corporal, because somebody in the port workshop where he was working said to him, "Private Garland, you need a bit of authority to work here. Sew a Lance Corporal stripe on your shoulder." At the end of the war, after 4 years in captivity, it was discovered that he wasn't a Lance Corporal, and the War Office took his stripe away from him, despite everything that he'd been through during the war. So I don't think he held it against his country. He was on his way at the end of the war, as you see, June the 24th, 1944, just over a year before the ending of the war, on a Hell ship, as they were called, one of the Japanese ships that would transport Allied soldiers. And that ship is on the right there. It was called the SS Tamahoko Maru, and it was torpedoed by the USS Tang. It was in a convoy, and the convoy was consisted of about 6 or 7 ships, and several of them were torpedoed by the USS Tang, including my father's ship. And as a result there, 560 out of 722 Allied prisoners of war died. My father was in the water, and he was only picked up because there was a Japanese soldier attached as well to the raft, or whatever it was, that he was clinging to. Otherwise, the Allied soldiers would not have been picked up, I have to say. And it happened in the East China Sea, as you can see, just off Japan in the bottom right there. So he ended up at Omine prison camp, and that is just about 50 miles, perhaps, from Nagasaki. I put some of the details down there, not just British, but also Australian, American, and Dutch. Fairly large camp, 1,750 prisoners of war, many of them suffering already. And had not the bomb been dropped, He was so weakened, as were all the other men, he couldn't work in the mine. It was a mine that was the purpose of the prison camp being there. He would certainly have died probably within 2 months. Maybe he might have lasted out 3. People were on a starvation diet, and the camp commandant there, Fukuhara, was later executed for war crimes. So, we get to the last year of the war. And how is this war going to end? A bombing campaign, conventional bombing campaign, is underway against cities in Japan. The principal focus, of course, is the capital, Tokyo, and Operation Meeting House is launched, and the worst bombing attack, takes place March the 10th, and individually it causes more destruction than any other bomb that's dropped or bombs that are dropped anywhere else in the Second World War, including the 2 bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Dresden in Germany, and Hamburg as well. But of course, it did not break the will of the Japanese people. A month later, Roosevelt dies and Truman takes his place, and one might ask the question, would the bomb have been dropped? Would FDR have made the same decision as Truman did? That's not a question that often gets asked, I think, because probably the answer is one has to say that he would have taken that decision, but we can't absolutely know for certain. So, when Truman was mulling over what to do, given the fact that the bombing campaign, the conventional bombing campaign, was not breaking the will of the Japanese people, he had several options available to him. He could continue, of course, hope that eventually Japan would simply crack under the weight of all these bombs being dropped on her, or he could undertake a ground invasion, or he could, as a demonstration, so to speak, drop the bomb on an unpopulated area so that the Japanese would realize just how powerful was this new bomb that the US had in its arsenal. Or he could do what he finally chose to do, of course, which was to explode the bomb on the populated area. Now, we can revisit these options, of course, but really, he had only one choice when it came down to it. He only had 2 bombs, and dropping the bomb on an unpopulated area would scarcely, I think, have made a particularly deep impression on the Japanese army. And besides, he appointed an interim committee to give him advice over this, and they determined we can propose no technical demonstration, that is to say, just drop it on an unpopulated area, likely to bring an end to the war. We can see no acceptable alternative to direct military use, which is to say, to use it in order to kill. Here we can actually pinpoint not just the minute, but the second, 5:29 and 45 seconds a.m., July the 16th, the testing of the atomic bomb at Alamogordo bombing range, which is, of course, successful and sets in motion a series of events that will lead to the dropping of the bomb. And just 10 days later, the leaders of the free world meet. Not at this point Stalin, who's on the right, signing off on the Potsdam Declaration, because at this point the Soviet Union had not joined the Allies. It would do so very soon afterwards. Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of China, he signed off on it by telegraph, so to speak. He wasn't present. And there is Churchill and Truman and a very famous picture there. And they send a demand for unconditional surrender to the Japanese. And the response comes back a day later from the Japanese Prime Minister, Suzuki, mokusatsu, which means simply ignore it. Just one word. So Japan had absolutely no intention to surrender at that point, and even though it had been threatened with awesome punishment if it did not. So the decision had to be made next where to bomb. And ultimately there were a number of choices, but it was whittled down to several. And of course, the first one is Hiroshima. And Hiroshima was the home to the Japanese Second Army. It also did not have a prisoner of war camp there as well. So it was decided that it had not been particularly heavily bombed either, if at all. And so the full effect of the bombing could be witnessed there in a city that also had significant military importance for the Japanese. That's what the target committee that was giving advice to the president decided. It's a large urban area of more than 3 miles in diameter, capable of being damaged effectively by the blast and likely to be unattacked in any other way. So there we see the city before its attack, and down on the right there you can see where Hiroshima is. And Kokura and Nagasaki. Kokura was to be the second site that would be bombed, second city that would be bombed, but in the event, because of bad weather, it was Nagasaki that was bombed instead. And of course, Enola Gay is the plane that carries the bomb that is called Little Boy, and it sets off and it hits or drops on Hiroshima, 8:15 a.m. local time, 7:15 p.m. Erie time on August the 5th. And a day later, an announcement is made by President Truman. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. While I was just sort of walking through the little corridor here, this book, The Words of Harry S. Truman, was on the pile, and I just happened to pick it up. And I was struck by something else which he said about dropping the bomb. I will return this book afterwards to the Jefferson, I promise. He says, "Never in history has society been confronted with a power of the atom so full of potential danger and at the same time so full of promise for the future of man and for the peace of the world. I think I can express the faith of the American people when I say that we can use the knowledge we have won, not for the devastation of war, but for the future welfare of humanity." And I think it's probably fair to say that the people who worked on the Manhattan Project, and President Truman himself as well, did hope that by unleashing this power and revealing to the world just what deadly force was available, that it would absolutely prevent any such further occurrence occurring ever again, which up to this point, of course, by happenstance or by judgment or whatever it might be, it has. So this is what Hiroshima looked like afterwards, a haunting picture of devastation. but nothing like the numbers who had been killed by conventional bombs in Tokyo. It obviously increased the numbers who died as a result of radiation and so forth, but the initial number of deaths was far fewer than occurred at Tokyo. And then the second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped, more complex. And as I said, Kokura was the original target, but because of bad weather and cloud cover, etc., the plane actually changed course and bombed Nagasaki. And as I mentioned, there was a prisoner camp. There were prisoners working in Nagasaki just a few weeks before the bomb was dropped. So by great good fortune, they'd been moved. And as far as I know, no prisoners of war were killed there either. And there is the devastation on August the 9th at Nagasaki. So, what happened after that? Well, the Soviet Union the day before had declared war on Japan, and 2 days later, Japan offered to surrender, but on condition that the emperor would be permitted to remain as the head of state. 4 days later, the Allies accepted Japan's conditional offer, but they offered their own condition that General MacArthur should be the supreme head of Japan. And then the day after, Japan agrees, and the formal surrender takes place September the 2nd. Now, that's a period of about 3 weeks. And things were not by any means simply running along smoothly at that point. There is evidence that there was resistance to the surrender even at this point, and that the army, certainly a faction of the army, was deeply opposed to surrender and believed that the war could still be fought and should be fought. And it was the intervention of the emperor, Hirohito, at a cabinet meeting that was locked in disagreement as to whether to carry on or whether not to, that actually tilted it in favor of surrender. The Allies, the prisoners of war did not, of course, immediately know that the war had ended. And my father tells a story that he was in his, the place where they lived, the room, and you had a little set of tallies on the board, on the wall, with where you were. And the only two places you could be would be in your room or in the kazi, that is the toilet. And so you had to change your tally from one place to another when you went out. And he said, one of his friends said, "I think the war has ended. I'm going to find out." And he took this little board, he threw it on the ground. And there was a Japanese soldier in the room. He got up and left. And my father said, at that point, we knew the war had ended. And 2 weeks or so after the Japan had formally surrendered, relief supplies came from the Americans. This is a drawing which was made by one of the prisoners of war in this camp, a man called Jeff Tyson. And he did these drawings knowing that if they had ever been found, he would have been executed by the Japanese. So, 9:04 a.m., this famous picture, General MacArthur, after Hirohito has signed the declaration of surrender, makes a comment, "These proceedings are closed." So, little by little in the camp, the Japanese melted and disappeared into wherever they might go, not wanting to be around when the camp was relieved. But before that, the camp commander made this declaration, which is an extraordinary comment. I'm pleased to inform you that we have received military orders for the stoppage of warfare, not surrender, nothing like that, but stoppage of warfare. Since you were interned in the camp, you have doubtless had to go through much trouble and agony, but you have overcome them. Round of applause there for the prisoners. And the news that the day on which you could return to your homeland, where your beloved wives, children, parents, brothers and sisters are eagerly waiting you, is probably your supreme joy. I would like to extend my most sincere congratulations for winning the war, I suppose he means, but at the same time I sympathize most deeply with those who have been unable, due to illness or some other unfortunate reason like being tortured, etc., to greet this joyous day. By order, we, the camp staff, have done all in our power towards your management and protection. It's like staying at the hotel where I've been staying for this week, say. You know, breakfast is there available, and somebody comes and cleans my room and takes my laundry away if I want it cleaned, etc. Well, that's what they've been doing in this camp as well, evidently. But owing to the destitute internal conditions here, you know, we didn't have a lot of food ourselves, so we were a little bit stretched. We did all we could, but it wasn't a lot that we could do. We regret that we were unable to do half of what we wanted to do for you. But I trust in your great understanding on this point. You won't hold this against us, and you'll understand. We were basically in the same situation, all of us. Lovely letter. So, the question arises, of course, what if the bomb had not been used? Well, these are the options here. The war could certainly have gone on for months. What would it have taken for Japan to surrender? It had demonstrated, the Japanese army had demonstrated that it would go to the utmost to defend itself, and certainly defending the homeland would have called every last man to preserve the independence, etc. There were on hand some 4,000, perhaps 5,000 kamikaze pilots for any aerial attack that the Allies might make, and still a very sizable army as well. So there is no guarantee by any means that the war, had it been the case that America had done a landing, that it would have ended within a short period of time. There were plans in order to Operation Olympic, I forget which, November the 1st. General MacArthur had plans ready, but he was very reluctant to make a landing because he knew very well that something between, it was estimated, 1 million to 2 million soldiers would die in taking Japan, added to which many, many, hundreds of thousands, if not as many, civilians would also have died. Japan at the time was also facing a shortage of rice. One option that MacArthur had sort of floated was that they would destroy the rice crop by poisoning it, and also that they would use poison gas against the army. But this was something that Truman had already said he would not tolerate. If a country does not use it against the US, he was not prepared to allow it to be used against that country. So the options were really very few at this point. And the long-term consequences on Japan, Japan returned to prosperity remarkably quickly after the war, but that would not have been the case, of course, if there had been a protracted land campaign, which would have devastated the economy for years and years and years. And just to sort of a measure of the degree to which the Japanese were prepared to fight on, Hiroo Onoda only finally surrendered in 1974. He was a second lieutenant in the Japanese army, and he did not believe the reports that Japan had actually surrendered. He could not think, that was unthinkable to him. And he was found by a tourist, and he was told, the war's ended, man. You know, you need to come back and enjoy your life, what's left of it in Japan. But it was only when his commanding officer flew to the Philippines, which is where he was, that he finally understood that it was time to surrender, or whatever you do at that point, I'm not sure, after the war has been over for 30 years. So that just gives one a measure of the strength of resistance that there would have been had Japan not surrendered in 1945.